Hello and welcome to NewsClick. The Goods and Services Tax GST was rolled out on July the 1st. Today we have with us Surajit Mazumdar, Professor of Economics at JNU, to talk about the GST. Welcome, Surajit.
Thank you.
The GST is claimed to be a big game changer for the Indian economy with massive positive effects. What do you think about that?
Well, it is a game changer in one sense that it is a very significant change in the tax system of the country insofar as we are moving away from towards a more centralized system of taxation. So it goes against the spirit of federalism. In that sense, it's a fundamental change, which is why it has required a constitutional amendment. But in terms of its effects on the economy, perhaps in the attempt to push through, the claims about its positive effects on the economy have been hugely exaggerated. If one looks, for example, the question of taxation, what is the thing? That in an economy, production generates a certain income, a certain portion of the total income that is generated accrues to the state in the form of tax revenues, which come through different kinds of taxes. And broadly, we have two kinds of taxes, direct and indirect. Direct are taxes where the person who pays the tax is the one on whom the burden of taxation also falls. In indirect taxes, someone pays the tax, the actual burden may be distributed to others. Now, what we have in our structure is a taxation structure where indirect taxes dominate, which means that large majority of the people in this country, despite the fact that their incomes may be very low, actually pay taxes, because whenever you buy something, somewhere or the other, there is an element of taxes that enters into it through the indirect taxes. So actually, if we also have a problem that our tax to GDP ratio is something which is exceptionally low. Now, if we are moving or progressing, we should be progressing in a direction where our tax to GDP ratio increases and increases in a manner where the direct tax proportion increases relative to the indirect tax proportion. 2/3 of our taxes come from indirect taxes. The norm is actually the other way around. 2/3 should come from direct taxes. But the effort here is to bring about a reform, which is a reform only in the indirect tax structure. So whether it will succeed or not in generating more revenues, we do not know yet. But even if it does, the question that will arise is, who is going to bear the burden of those taxes? And are we going to actually do what is equitable and what is right from an economic point of view also, which is to levy a higher burden of taxes on those who have actually the means to pay those taxes? To do that, we need to generate far more revenues from direct taxes, and that's not what this particular measure is attempting. So in terms of reform of the tax structure system in this country, the real challenge that is there is something that the transition to GST does not actually address. In fact, it might end up levying a greater burden on poor and working people in this country who actually have to bear the burden of indirect taxes.
It is claimed that the GST will reduce the tax burden on the people, but at the same time, it is also claimed that the state's revenue or overall revenue will go up. So how is that possible?
Well, as I said, that's an impossibility, that you can't have both things at the same time unless you have a very dramatic increase in the total income that is generated within the economy. So that the income generated within the economy, if that does not increase dramatically, then the part which comes to the state as revenue, the rest that remains with the people has to be reduced. You can't have it both ways. So it's a myth that is being propagated that this is a win-win situation where people will have to pay less taxes, but yet the state will have more revenues. The only way that is possible is if there is a very dramatic increase in income, and it has to be a dramatic increase in income if a lower burden of taxes is going to generate a higher revenue. If your tax GDP ratio is going to improve, then of course a larger proportion of the income has to be paid as taxes. We do need an improvement in the tax GDP ratio. In India, it is below 18%. It is very low, central and state governments combined. Question is, from where must you get the taxes to increase the tax GDP ratio? You must get it more and more from direct taxes in order to make the tax structure more progressive and equitable. At the moment, it is highly regressive because large part of your taxes come from indirect taxes. So, and as far as the increase in income is concerned, the problems of the Indian economy, which mean so many people don't have jobs, so many people have problems of low income, the problems which are leading to stagnation and investment in the economy, poor growth of the industrial sector, the agrarian crisis, these are not problems that are going to be resolved by GST. In fact, unless, because one of the key things that you need to do if you want to address the problem of the economy is that you must generate more revenue for the state from those who have the ability to pay and step up public spending on a whole range of areas. That's one of the key things that you need to do. The GST regime is not going to enable that because you are relying on indirect rather than direct taxes in the attempt to generate more revenue. So, if you are going to increase the burden of taxation in the form of indirect taxes, that's going to be inequitable, whereas your fiscal policy has to move in the other direction, tax those who have more and spend on areas which benefit those who have less. That's the direction of shift that you need.
So, you don't think that the claim that the GST implementation will lead to a rise in GDP growth rate by 2% and so on is correct?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The problem of the Indian economy is that you have income and spending ability too concentrated in the hands of some. That's the fundamental problem. Now, they want to spend. They want to spend to make more money out of that. For that, they have to invest. But when they have to invest, the problem comes, whatever they produce with that investment has to be sold. But who's going to buy? There are a large number of people who don't have the means to buy. So, you have that problem. And because of that, you don't invest also. So, that spending also further tends to come down. So, if that is the problem, then you have to find ways and means of shifting the ability to spend from those who have too much to those who have too little. That's not something that GST is going to achieve. If it's not going to achieve that, it's not going to solve the fundamental problems of the economy. So, why will the growth rate get stepped up by 2%?
So, what is the effect going to be on the states regarding their revenue, for instance? It is claimed, for instance, that the high consumption states are going to benefit out of GST. What do you think about that?
Well, you see, we are in a country in which, of course, different states and different regions of the country are at extremely different economic levels. So, we are a country tailor-made for a highly federal structure. We have very great diversity economically. We have, of course, linguistic, cultural diversity in addition to that. So, we face a real challenge in trying to ensure a more balanced process of development in the country. Now, the assumption underlying this thing that poorer states will benefit more is that they have high consumption, but they have low production. And since the GST is supposed to be a destination based tax rather than an origin based tax, then that it will benefit the poorer states who have higher consumption and lower income. But what is the basis for this assertion? Typically, an economy where their production and income levels are low is also a low consumption state, unless there is some great amount that is coming from outside, which is financing consumption, which is like remittances become. But largely, a state with low production and low income will also tend to be a low consumption state. So, it's not correct to say, and there is no basis on which, and there is no hard data on the basis of which you can establish that the poorer states will benefit in terms of revenue that they will get through this particular regime. In any case, I don't think a judgment about a system of like GST should be made only on the basis of this one or two criteria. Overall, if one sees, there are several questions about with relation to the GST, whether what will be its impact on total revenues, what will be its impact on the distribution of revenues between center states and across states, and what will be its impact on the burden, distribution of the burden of paying these taxes. So, there are several questions about this which are not, for which such clear answers do not exist, as is made out to be that it is all going to be a beneficial thing. That is one side of the thing, that there is an answer, that it is unclear what will be the exact effects of all of these. The second is that it does not address the fundamental challenges that are actually confronting the Indian economy.
To ask you another question which is raised by many people, the GST is supposed to be a magic pill which solves many problems at the same time, improving compliance, wiping out the black economy, all of that. What do you have to say about these?
Well, when demonetization happened, the promise was that this is going to wipe out black money, this is going to wipe out terrorism, this is going to wipe out, eliminate the problem in Kashmir. We have seen what has happened, okay, and the same is true of GST. Of course, any measure you take, there is a question of how you are going to implement it, the ensuring that there is compliance. That is a challenge that a tax regime is always facing. So, what is it about GST in particular which will, and if you do not have an administrative system, if the state does not have the capacity to enforce its tax laws and ensure that everyone pays the taxes that are supposed to be paid, then just shift to a GST regime is not going to solve that particular problem. In fact, the question is that you have a tax administration which is used to a particular structure of taxes. Now, you have shifted to a new regime. How will that, does that tax administration system have the capacity to ensure higher compliance with this system? Where is the assessment done of that? The capacity of the tax administration to implement and enforce this new particular regime in a way that improves compliance. Where is the assessment of that has been done? No such assessment has been done. It is an assumption that simply you change your tax rules and that solves the problem. So, the myth that has been propagated for the last 20-25 years, that you make things so called simpler, you reduce the tax rates and that ensures compliance. But you have been doing that for 25 years. And what has happened to our tax-GDP ratio? Okay. Is it dramatically improving? No. Compared to the, in fact, what has happened is that the rate at which the tax-GDP ratio has been increasing has slowed down in a time when average per capita income levels have grown faster. So, the efficiency of your tax mobilization effort in some sense can be said to have come down rather than increased, while you have been reducing rates and making things simpler, introducing, making increased use of IT, all of that has been happening, but it has not produced the kind of compliance and revenues that you promised would happen. So, it has been a series of steps taken with the promise that sometime in the future the black economy will be eliminated, sometime in the future you will have more adequate revenues for government to provide all kinds of benefits to the citizens of this country. But it is always a promise that remains a promise about the future. It never becomes the present.
Thanks, Surajit, for talking to us, and thank you for watching.